Good evening, aviation aficionados. It is Tuesday, November 8th, 2022. Very slow news day. There is nothing happening in America. And if you're watching a rerun of this in the future, go back and check and see if I have any idea what I'm talking about. We're going to do another episode of Ask an Ambassador just because we're in the mood. I'm Jamie Beckett, the AOPA You Can Fly ambassador for the Eastern U.S. Way down there at the bottom of the screen is the fabulous Pat Brown, who covers the same job duties for the Central U.S. And, of course, the fabulously lovely Kay Sunrum over there in California, keeping the West Coast nailed down. We're going to be talking tonight about Over the Hills and Far Away Part 2. Because that's what you do in an airplane. You go someplace. We do all that flight training. We do all those practice landings and takeoffs in the local area. And hopefully you go out and do a stall now and then. But really, it's all about going someplace. And it doesn't always go as planned, does it, Kay?
It certainly doesn't. You know, when you're a general aviation pilot, you have to have a plan B and C and not be so laser focused on getting from point A to B exactly as you planned. That's just part of the territory of being a GA pilot. But the nice part of it is there's a lot of adventures that you can have along the way that you may not have planned for that you can't do in commercial travel. So I personally like the latter.
Oh, yeah. Now, Pat, I understand you're a pilot. Have you ever gone anywhere in the airplane?
I've been accused of worse. Yeah, I mean, that's what it's there for. I mean, I spent a lot of time, of course, flying around Houston, but gosh, in the last year, I've been to Oshkosh, Sun and Fun in Denver, Colorado. This is just in the last 12 calendar months, and the year before last, obviously Oshkosh and Sun and Fun every year. We went to Michigan a couple of years ago. Been all over the place.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to a guy today, a public official, not elected, an appointed public official, and he was asking me what it takes to get a pilot certificate and how long it takes and what's involved. And he was kind of hemming and hawing. And I was saying, you know what? It literally changes your life because we're in Central Florida and the state capital's in Tallahassee, and he has to go there a few times a year. So you can do a 9-hour drive or a 2-hour flight, your choice. It really does change things. So as long as we're on the topic, let's talk about the unexpected, because I think maybe when I started flying, that was the biggest surprise, that I put all this effort into planning flights, short flights or long flights, but especially cross countries to another destination. And it never really works out the way my plan was. There's always something. And of course, my example today, I was mentioning to both of you offline, I have flights scheduled on Thursday this week, but unfortunately there's this hurricane thing, second one this year. So that's not going to happen. But Pat, that's a real thing, isn't it? I mean, and it's not just hurricane. There's an awful lot of weather phenomenon that can really affect our decision to go or not go on a flight, delay our departure, or, you know, change our route. All those things are possible because of a whole wide variety of weather phenomenon. Isn't that your experience?
Well, yeah. And as a matter of fact, Donnie, if you could, since we're talking about Sun and Fun for a minute, if you can pull up that slide that we were talking about earlier, that one right there. This was 2 years ago, if I remember right. I've been there so many times, I've forgotten. That was 2 years ago, I think. And we actually had to stop in Tallahassee the night before and just wait for the storm to pass. So that's one example. If we can pull up that Michigan slide, if you would please, Donnie. This is from a couple of years ago going to Michigan. This was supposed to be a VFR flight, but as you can see, it didn't turn out that way. Of course, you know, what you see there on the screen is a little bit misleading because, again, Donnie, if you'll put up that other slide that shows what that one, and then there's another one that shows what we actually saw through the cockpit. There you go. That's what we actually saw. But what happened was, and you can take it down if you like there. What happened is because of that unexpected weather, we had to divert, obviously. We had plenty of fuel, but what was planned originally to be about a 3 hour and 45-minute leg from Houston to Evansville in Illinois or Indiana, I forget in which, where we stopped for gas, turned out to be a 5-hour flight. And when we had plenty of gas left over, I was doing the calculations all along the way, and we had well over an hour of gas when we landed. But let me tell you something, that was a 5-hour flight that we didn't really expect. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff can get you. And Kay, that picture of what it actually looks like from the cockpit brings to mind a lesson I got from a flight instructor very early in my training that I've always taken really seriously. Never scud run. And there can be, especially on a long trip where you're, oh, gee, I'm almost to my destination. I'll just dip down below this. That's one of those things that we really have to restrain ourselves, isn't it? Because that's going to turn out really badly one day.
Well, unfortunately, the VFR flight into IMC condition year after year is one of those categories where a lot of pilots get into trouble. And it turns out that the pilots who are attending safety seminars are constantly engaged in learning new things. They're not usually the ones who make that mistake. So when you hear it again and again, don't fall into that trap. You're less likely to do it, but it really is about discipline and saying, okay, this is my personal minimum. If the weather gets below 4 miles in visibility, or it has haze, or X number of altitude for clouds, if you write all those things down, then when you're in flight, you're less likely to fall into that trap of that get there-itis and just get into the scud running, because you'll say, no, okay, this is getting a little too uncomfortable for me because I know what my personal minimums are. And so unfortunately, it is one of the number one killers. And the only way around that is by awareness, by education, and then being real disciplined that this is my minimum and I'm not going to cross that line.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I like personal minimums. By the way, we have flight service who dropped in to say hello. I feel pretty validated, don't you guys? I mean, flight service came to see us instead of vice versa. We have somebody with, I'm assuming that's some type of Asian language that I don't know, who says hello. So hello back, but I really don't know any of what that language is. And Bob Gardner says, hi, everyone. And that's a nice all-inclusive kind of greeting. Thank you, Bob. Right back at you. To your point, though, Kay, one of the things we got to consider, not just not scud running, when you get those personal minimums limits. Hello, Janet. See, that spells Janet in some other language. I don't know what it is. It may be best to just accept reality and land at a place you didn't intend to be, even if you end up staying overnight. And that's one of those things on a long trip we sometimes don't plan. Pat, when I came home from Houston in the 152, I was almost home, and I'm watching on the radar, and there's some pretty good thunderstorms in front of me, and it doesn't seem to be between me and home, but it's close, and there's a delay in that. I landed in Ocala, 30 minutes from home, just to be on the ground, and let's really look at this and see what's going on. I don't need to get in trouble at the last little bit. If I had to, I'd have stayed there overnight. As it turned out, I had a nice wide corridor I could get through, but that's one of those things to think about, that it's not always going to work out the way you plan. So have a credit card and the ability to stay overnight if you have to.
Well, they say it's always better to be on the ground wishing you were flying than flying wishing you were on the ground, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. And Pat, I'll throw this to you because we were talking about this earlier, and it was really interesting. I just had one of my kids, a high school flying club kid I work with. He just did his solo cross country for his private. He's very proud. He did a great job. He's making terrific progress. But I asked him, did you have to refuel? And he was like, oh, no, I've never refueled. And, that's something that's really common. It's not in the PTS. It's not in the ACS. There's nothing in there that says you have to learn how to refuel.
Yeah.
And it does occasionally happen. Somebody gets their certificate and they're happy and they launch off for a destination and they get there and realize, I have no idea how to fuel the airplane. That's really, for CFIs, it's worth teaching people. And for pilots, it's worth finding out, how does full serve work? How does self-serve work?
Yeah, I every flight school where I do check rides. It's if they're low on gas, it's pick up the telephone and call the FBO, and I need a top off on Cessna 12345 over at the flight school, and there you go. And because they always start with full tanks, and they're even on their long cross countries, at a private level anyway, 150 miles isn't usually enough to have to worry about stopping and getting some gas, and so they don't get that. The one of the challenges that you can come up with, though, or up against, though, is I remember one year going to Sun and Fun, and we had planned to stop. I don't remember where, somewhere in Louisiana or Mississippi or someplace like that. Anyway, we landed there, a beautiful FBO and whatnot, but they hadn't gotten their gas delivery that week. So fortunately, we had plenty of gas to go to another place about 30 miles away. And so I thought, okay, that's, note to self. I'm going to call the next time before we do that. Well, you would think you would learn, but no, a few months later, we went to Oshkosh and stopped where we normally stop to get gas on a Sunday. And then in the ensuing year, they had gone to a policy where they were closed on Sundays. And if you wanted to get some gas, you had to call the guy out, and it took an hour for him to come in. And there was a premium that we paid for a call out on Sunday. So fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. I don't know how that goes.
I appreciate the thought. By the way, Janet has come back. That unknown language is Japanese, so I have to say konnichiwa. I only know that because of Cheap Trick doing a live album from Budokan. I don't even know what it means, but
oh
it
no,
is Japanese.
domo arigato.
Oh, okay, that's sticks.
Mr. Roboto.
Pat and I have learned all our foreign language skills through rock and roll bands. Yes, Kay.
Hey, I wanted to say one more thing about not about Japanese, about what we were talking about earlier with the self-fueling. If you're an aircraft owner or you're borrowing an airplane from someone and you're paying for the cost of fuel, you might want to look at the cost difference between full serve and self-serve. It could sometimes be 50 cents or $1. And if you're filling up 50 gallons, that's $50 right there, or $25. Now, hopefully you're not going to be landing there with no fuel. You would have at least 1 hour of fuel in your tank, or, well, they say half hour, but my personal minimum is landing with 1 hour of fuel. But that could save you a lot of money, and it might be worthwhile to just do the self-serve.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because beyond self-serve, full serve, there's just, what do they charge at that airport? Get into South Florida, and there's places where it can be $9 a gallon, and there's places on the same day where it can be $5.25. So, and it's not that far apart. So there are services where you can find out what that's going to cost. I know when I fly to Key West, the fuel is quite expensive there, but if I pay for the fuel, I don't have to pay the ramp charge. So I buy some fuel, enough to get out of the ramp charge, and then I'm going home. Danny Carson says, hello, guys. Can we wave and say hi right back to Danny Carson? Hi, Danny Carson. Thank you. By the way, if any of you, Danny or Janet or Bob or flight service even, if you've been on a flight and it didn't work out exactly the way you planned, go ahead and give us a thumbs up, or me, or yup, because I'm thinking it might not just be the three of us. Mm-hmm. And beyond fuel, which is a serious thing, let's talk about something that nobody wants to talk about, the need for a repair. Let's face it, every once in a while, something goes wrong with the airplane en route. Maybe the engine starts running rough. Maybe the oil temperature all of a sudden goes high. Maybe your passenger is a little stressed and has their feet on the brakes when you land, and now you've got flat spots or a blown tire. Kay, have you ever flown into someplace and found you needed to get maintenance done? And how do you go about that? Finding somebody to do a repair or just look at something on the airplane?
Absolutely. That's, if it hasn't happened, I hate to say this, is going to happen at one point in time. And if you have a flying club plane that you're using on a cross country and there's maintenance, you want to follow that flying club or flight school, what their protocol is for maintenance. Usually there's a telephone number that you need to call, and it's going to be either the director of maintenance, or it might be the aircraft owner or the chief pilot. And then they have a process that they will follow in getting service to the airplane that's down. If you are the aircraft owner, I highly recommend getting a service where you have some professionals at your fingertips that you can tap into to help you find mechanics that are close by. It might be on the field, it might be 100 miles or 300 miles away, depending on whether you're flying in a desolate part of the country. And so this is where it's important to be prepared for the flight and be prepared for these sort of issues where you might end up being at an airport for a lot longer. And if there isn't a hotel or car rental or anything like that nearby, you want to make sure that you're prepared to wait, because it could take hours or more than a day to get some help to the airplane. But the key is to know who to contact.
You know, that's very true. My first time being stranded was I had flown to Key West in February, and this is over 30 years ago, and the alternator died on the airplane. And I didn't know because the ammeter had a very short throw. I didn't realize I was discharging the battery while I went, and starting the airplane up to depart was the last energy it had. So I had no more electrical system. I had to call the place that the airplane had come from, the place I rented it from. And unfortunately, they couldn't get a part to me till the next day. And I cannot tell you the horror of being stranded in Key West in February. It is just awful. Nobody should have to live this kind of lifestyle. Which brings us right to a very good comment from Christopher Ritchie. And Christopher, I seriously appreciate this. This is a great comment. You might want to consider having a second credit card. His particular financial institution, he can only use that credit card in 2 states within a 24-hour period. I've had that happen. I've bought fuel in Florida and then later that day bought it in Alabama, and I get a text that my cards have been shut off because they think it's fraud. The rest of the world doesn't realize we fly.
Well,
so that's something worth knowing. Yes, Pat.
Yeah, whenever I'm going to make a trip like that, I actually call the credit card company that I'm going to be using, and I tell them that I'm going on a trip and I'm a pilot, and they're going to see some rather large charges, perhaps in the same day from different states. It is not fraud, and usually that takes care of that.
I do the same thing, but I do it online. I notify the credit card that, hey, there's going to be, it might be especially if it's international. I always do that to make sure that it's working, but domestic too. Mm-hmm.
I'm not smart enough to do an online, Kay. I have to call somebody. I'm sorry.
I love that you admitted that in public, Pat. That's a very bold move. And I've got to take my hat up to Mike Jesh, the very cool Mike Jesh. And he really is. If you ever get a chance to meet him in person, take it. This guy's awesome. He says his card was once suspended on the way to AirVenture when he stopped for fuel in Nebraska, which begs the question, was the problem AirVenture or Nebraska? We really have to look into that. But, you know, that really is, we're back to repairs. If you own the airplane beyond the credit card, it really is worth building up a fund each time you fly. Whenever I've owned an airplane, and I'd be curious if you guys do this as well, I make sure I put a little extra money. I actually pay myself an hourly charge into an account whenever I fly the airplane. So when something does happen, I don't have that big gulp moment. Where am I coming up with the money? I've already put money away for that sort of thing. That's very helpful. And Ted McDavitt has disparaged you with a comment about a rotary dial phone. I don't think we can take Ted seriously anymore.
No, but I'm telling you, I'm texting him right now, and you don't want to know the words that I'm using.
And may I say, he's doing that on an Android phone. And Kay and I are just horrified.
Because I'm that much of a Luddite.
But yeah, I mean, you may find sometimes, you know, even that scenario with a flat tire, that's going to be hundreds of dollars. And there's the embarrassment of I'm stuck on the runway and you do need to get somebody. If you haven't prepared for that financially in advance, having the credit limit, having money in a bank account, whatever, it can make your trip really uncomfortable and ruin an otherwise wonderful trip. So it's beyond the traditional flight planning, blah, blah, blah. The financial part is worth thinking. But Kay, you said something a little while ago that piqued my interest, and I really liked it. Far, we need to have a half an hour's fuel left when we reach our destination, and that's very wise. But you, even more wisely, don't go with a half an hour. You go with an hour. What's your logic for having a larger buffer?
Well, usually when the tanks are full, it's not a matter of fuel capacity that's going to determine my stops. It's usually a bladder issue. Honestly, I don't like to fly for more than about 2.5 hours. I like to stop. Very rarely am I on a GA flight where it is so time sensitive that I gotta get there really fast. I like to stop along places, and that's one of the pleasures of flying GA. But I do like to have an hour, and here's why. In this area in the Southwest, we've got a lot of mountains, we got restricted airspace, and we've got the ocean on one end, right? And so uh, it's not a just short hop over to another airport. It could easily take an extra 20 minutes. And then if you end up having to do an instrument approach, that could add another half hour. And so I don't want to have that antsy feeling. All right, I gotta find the airport that's closest to me and pick that because I won't have enough fuel to go a little further. I want to have more options, particularly with the terrain that I'm surrounded by, and that's why I choose the 1 hour.
There's a way of looking at it. Pat, one of the things that has always fascinated me, non-pilots talk to me and they see my Cessna 152, that monstrous beast of an airplane, and they say, how far can you go in that? And I tell them, a world, you just have to keep stopping for fuel. But one of the things we'll see in stats on airplane when we see performance numbers is they'll give us the duration of the airplane in miles. And I've always thought that was a mistake because it's not really in miles, it's in time, because depending whether you have a tailwind, you have a headwind, that difference and how far you can cover on this tank safely can vary wildly. So I own time when I'm planning a flight rather than in miles. And do you do the same thing, or do you have a different method?
I'm with Kay. I'm not limited about the gas. I'm limited about the bladder. At some point, I mean, really about 3 or 3.5 hours. And then, to be a little bit more serious, not that isn't serious, but to be a little bit more serious, I just feel I need to get out and stretch my legs a little bit. The airplanes that I fly are all very comfortable, but at the same time, after about 3 or 3.5 hours in the car, my lower back starts to bother me and I need to get out and stretch. And I don't have back problems, but after about 3 or 3.5 hours in the car, same thing in the airplane. After about 3 or 3.5 hours, it's just time to get out and stretch my legs and, take a deep breath. So
I have the same thing. I've got the standard 152 now with 20-ish gallons of fuel, which means I've got more than 3 hours duration, but I don't like going more than 2 for the same reason, Pat. I'm extraordinarily old. I'm in my early 90s. And at some point, I just need to straighten up. And of course, if I stay in the airplane too long, it takes longer to straighten up when I get out. I used to fly a 152 that had long-range tanks, and I also had a 182 that had long-range tanks, which meant I could do a 5-hour leg. And you know what? That's great for covering distance, but you're absolutely right. You're starting to get tired. You don't, in my case, I don't have a second pilot to spell me. You might be getting uncomfortable just physically, whether it's got to go to the bathroom, I'm hungry, whatever. I don't really like eating in the airplane. So there's real advantages to planning your stops based on the time increment and your comfort level. We're supposed to be enjoying this. It's really not about getting there. It's about how we get there. And to that extent, it's kind of enjoyable to just say, you know what, I'm going to stop someplace I've never been, see the sights, meet some new people, and maybe I stay for lunch, or maybe I just grab a power bar out of my bag and then continue on.
Yeah.
That's my theory.
Could I just acknowledge just for a minute here that my friend Ted McDavitt has made actually one of his really rare intelligent comments that's right there on the screen. If you want to share that.
Okay, I'm willing. Take it away, Pat.
A tool I've started using recently for long trips to unfamiliar airports is Microsoft Flight Sim. I can get a good feel for what my destination will look like before I'm right on top of the airport. The graphics these days are incredibly realistic and provide good visual references as well as obstacle identification. The grammar and the punctuation is all good. Ted. So,
I'm
but
glad I'm not the only one you do this to. I feel better now knowing it's other people.
Don't get on Pat's bad side, okay? That's what we all are
Oh.
learning here.
I've got a check ride with him coming up in about 6 weeks. Better watch out.
Yeah, don't poke the DPE with a sharp stick. That's not going to work out.
Oh.
And Mike Josh has noticed that we've been let out of the cage, and we are a little brutal tonight. But this is us in our natural state, Mike.
Oh yeah.
Can I add a comment to
Please,
Ted's brilliant
please.
suggestion there about Microsoft Flight Sim? Yes, and if you don't have this Microsoft Flight Sim or any other simulator, that's fine. If you're using any of the aviation apps, there is a layer feature where you don't have to look at the aeronautical chart. You can actually look at what's called the aerial map, and that will give you your actual route with the aerial map and all the terrain right on there, or go onto Google Maps, but you won't have your route on that. So that's why I suggest you use the aviation map and take a look at the aerial map without all the aeronautical layers on there, and then start zooming in to see the terrain and different features. And that's a great way to get familiar with areas that you have not been to.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true. By the way, our crack producer, Donnie McKay, has alerted me that occasionally I'm freezing up tonight. It's not actually me, it's my internet connection. I am in Central Florida. We have a hurricane coming, and I'm in a fairly agricultural area of the state where much of our internet is still primarily Dixie cups and string. So I apologize for freezing up. It's not you, it's me. Trust me. Just like I've had girlfriends say that years ago. It's not you, it's me. But in any case, let's talk about Kay. I think you've got a really neat little printed form, and I mean little printed form that I like. When we go on a flight, especially a long flight to an unfamiliar destination, there's a lot of information we have to gather if we're going to do this responsibly. And I have heard people, I'm sorry to say, who have departed my home airport, non-towered, and on the CTAF, they start calling people and asking, what's the frequency at my destination? We really need to prepare in advance, but you have a really nice, orderly way of keeping that information that can make that next leg so much simpler.
Yes. So I start off in the aviation app. Now, whether you're using ForeFlight or WingX or Garmin Pilot, it doesn't matter. Everybody has a favorite app. And so, or you might even be just doing it on the computer, on the internet, AOPA Flight Planner, for example. Start off at the big level and get all the information that you need, the frequencies. And as you are getting ready to go fly, I have this little, it's post-it note. This is actually from the Office of Runway Safety from the FAA. I picked this up at Oshkosh, and what it has is the airport identification, the field elevation, the pattern altitude. I'll put this back up here again. The reason why that's really important is you're not going to get your pattern altitude on the chart, right? That's something that you have to look up in the chart supplement. You can't always assume that it's 1,000 feet above the ground. That's typical, but that's not always the case. But then look at this this little block here for the ATIS information, taxi route, hold short of runway, and then there's some space for frequency and notes. And if you can't find this at your pilot shop or any of the trade shows where the FAA is located, then just use a sticky note and write that information, whatever's important, and stick it up on the panel. Is that information readily available in your navigation equipment and in your electronic flight bag? Yes, it is. That's where you're getting the information from. But if you have it organized and then just a little post-it up on the panel, then you're not searching for it. Plus, when you write things down, you're more likely to remember. So this is where I like to put down also, that the runway's available. This is where there's that little block that says assigned runway. And I will even just draw out the runway with the length to make sure that I have adequate runway length for higher performance airplanes that I fly. So keep all that information organized. It will make your flight so much more easier and enjoyable.
I do a similar thing. I use a 5x7 pad. It's just a habit since the old days because they used to fit on knee boards. I keep most of that same information, but I learned a trick when I was in flight school years ago that I still use to this day. I draw the airport diagram for that airport, just a rough stick figure version with an arrow with the direction I'm coming from. So when I get to the other end, I kind of have a sense of which runway are they using and what's my entry going to look like. That's primarily at a non-towered airport. At a towered airport, they're going to give me instructions, but it can make it so much easier to get in and out if I have that little cheat sheet right with me. Pat, do you do anything in particular, or do you just use your voluminous brain to just memorize everything?
Well, I do like everybody else does, or should do, I guess. I mean, I'll look at the airport diagram, try to get a visual for which way we're coming in. I don't draw it out like you do, Jamie, but I think that's an excellent idea. One of the things that I make sure to do, though, especially if I'm flying VFR, is to look at the airport data block, the one that talks about the elevation and the runway length and all of that kind of stuff, because there you're going to see a little letter L, and there's going to be a little asterisk to the left of that little letter L. And a lot of people think that means pilot controlled lighting. And in fact, most of the time it does mean pilot controlled lighting. But if you look at the sectional on the tab where you have all the legend stuff, it actually says special lighting conditions exist. Check. Try that twice. Check supplement. And I'll give you an example. In Navasota, which is a small airport northwest of here, the common traffic advisory frequency is 122.9, but the pilot control lighting frequency is 123.3. And people have died, not at Navasota, but people have died as a result of coming into an airport at night and thinking that the pilot control lighting is the CTAF, and it's not. So when you see that little L with the asterisk to the left of it, don't just assume that pilot control lighting is the same frequency. It very well could be. It probably is. But do you want to bet your life on probably? I certainly don't.
Yeah, I like that. That's true. And I'm going to depart from the script just a little bit right now. And probably the viewers don't know. Every word we say is scripted. None of this is off the top of our head. I'm going to depart just for a moment. We talked about how you keep track of runway diagrams. Danny Carson says he uses ForeFlight. I have that as well. It's a great service. But, we got to take this seriously, because over the past year, there have been a number of fairly high profile and really unfortunate mid-airs. And sometimes, and let's face it, those almost always happen on a nice VFR day, and very often at a non-towered airport, but not exclusively. And it very often can be because there are parallel runways and we said we're lining up on 36 left, but we're actually lining up on 36 right. Or we overshoot the base to final turn and ended up in the path of somebody else. So we really don't want to get lazy when we do all this. And we don't want to be so rigid we're not enjoying ourselves. But being aware of what the layout of the runways is at that destination airport, what obstacles are around it. There's lots of ways to find this information, whether it's ForeFlight or using Flight Sim, which actually does have a lot of great stuff. You looking up in the chart supplement, which we used to call the airport facility directory, all of those things have information that'll tell us, is it a right-hand pattern here or is it a left-hand pattern? Is it a towered airport or a non-towered airport? Knowing all that way before we get there and being prepared for what's likely to happen, and even monitoring the common traffic advisory frequency so we know who's using which runway, how many aircraft are there. Do we want to stay out here in orbit until some of them have cleared the area, or are we comfortable going in? All that stuff should be part of your thought process, in my humble opinion. Do I have any disagreement from my fellow ambassadors on that point?
No, let me have an amen.
I like that. Kay,
Jamie, I would add one more thing to that. It's as far as taking a look at the chart supplement, I would highly encourage all viewers to print out the taxi diagram, or definitely have an electronic version of it where you don't have to flip back and forth from a map page to an airport page. So ideally you'd have two devices, or you would have your moving map and you'd have a printout of the airport diagram. And the reason why that's important, especially as you get to larger airports, is that it can get complicated after you land. For example, when I leave from here from Palomar to go to Long Beach, and Long Beach is one of the most complicated airports on the ground, I usually request a progressive taxi, which means they'll give you step-by-step direction to your destination there. But getting to the airport and then not knowing, well, where the transient parking is can be a nightmare. So you really need to spend some time looking at the airport diagram and having that easily accessible in the cockpit.
Yeah, absolutely true. Um, Kay, you've done some very long cross countries and various airplanes. Is there one that sticks out in your mind as just that was a really interesting, whether it was good experience, bad experience, educational, or just truly enjoyable? Is there one that sticks out in your mind? What kind of an aircraft were you flying?
I have so many flights that are memorable. I can't just pick one, but I will talk about one that's fairly recent. And I know we have a screenshot of this. Donnie, if you can put the one that we talked about on one of the other episodes. This is from Indiana down to Texas. Yeah, here it is. And then all the way to Montgomery Field in San Diego. This was last February. It was quite cold departing out of Indiana. I was going to pick up a SR-20 from West Lafayette, Indiana, and flew down to Redbird in Texas. And that was a very long day, that first leg, and spent the night there in Redbird. And then the second day continued on to still in Texas, Pat, the whole time, all the way to El Paso there, and then went to Gila Bend for a fuel stop, and then this was the third day into Montgomery. So that was just a fun flight because I didn't have a whole lot of time in the SR-20 there, so I love this area. I love all the GA planes. It's just I feel fortunate to be in just flying in GA. But that was a memorable flight just because of all the terrain that we passed by and the different airports and the people that I met along the way. And I did have a meeting in Redbird, and so it was nice to meet with those folks. It was a functional trip also, and I got to say that one will always stick with me for a long time.
I'll tell you, the one that's most memorable for me is memorable for all the wrong reasons, but I still have a sense of humor about it. I had flown the 152 up to New England, and I was coming back to Florida. And I won't say what state. It was north of Washington, D.C., but there was an airport I stopped in on the way north that I really liked. It had a paved runway. It had a grass runway. It was just this really small, out of the way, family owned FBO kind of thing. It was just absolutely terrific. I loved it. So I planned it as a fuel stop on the way home. The fuel prices were good. Everything was great. I landed on the way home. I fueled up, parked the airplane over in the grass because there is no paved ramp. Went in, restroom, paid for my fuel, grabbed a candy bar or something. Went out, got in the airplane, fired it up, and a woman comes out of the FBO waving her arms at me and walking towards the airplane. Well, that's kind of an uncomfortable thing since she's walking towards the end with the spinny part. So I shut down, and the woman comes right up to the airplane and says, "We're preparing for an event here. I can't let you take off." And I'm taking the answer, well, there's no NOTAM that you're closed. And, I flew in. I live in Florida. I can't stay here for a week until your event is over. And she wasn't part of the airport. She was part of the people setting up this event. And you have to be diplomatic. And it was just very uncomfortable. And what I ended up doing was getting one of the flight instructors there to walk in front of my airplane as I taxied out to the hold short point, and that satisfied her. But she was convinced I was going to run into one of the two pickup trucks and three people on the field on this enormous hundreds of acres field. But those things can happen. Everything seems to be fine, but nobody issued a NOTAM saying it was closed. So you think it's open, you go there and you find out now you have a problem with somebody who actually doesn't understand aviation. I find humor in it now, but it was somewhat frustrating then. Pat, have you ever had a good or bad experience that really sticks out in your head and might be instructive in some way to a guy like Mike Jesh, who really could use some insight from a guy like you?
I'm really racking my brain trying to trying to think of something that might have happened to me on a cross country. The only thing that really, the one thing that really jumped out when you asked that was I was getting ready to leave from a local restaurant where we had some, not the one I took you to, but another restaurant on a field several years ago. And I was out on the ramp getting ready to get in the airplane, and I noticed somebody start up an Arrow. And first of all, they flooded the engine, so there was gas dripping out on the pavement below. They finally were able to get it started, and for some unexplained reason, the pilot taxied away from the fuel farm that he was aimed at, and then stopped, and then got out of the airplane with the engine still running and nobody in the cockpit. And that was, it's probably
That's a
not
big
really.
no.
That's a huge no. And I'm really not one for confrontation. I will do just about anything to avoid confrontation. But I was over there in about a minute and a half telling him to get back in the airplane and shut it down now. And so we had this was several years ago, but we had a conversation about how, just in your words, galactically stupid that was. That was a little bit more tactful than that, but not much. But I can't think of anything other than that. But something that's instructive for anybody that's listening and thinks that it's a good idea to get out of the airplane, just leave it unattended with the motor running.
Yeah, that's crazy. Ingram Leedy has a great question for us, and Ingram is a regular visitor to Ask an Ambassador. I really like this. It fits in right in with the topic today. How do you usually pick airports along your route? Fuel price, FBO brands, city life, potluck. I'll start because I'm an egocentric guy, so it's all about me. I like non-towered airports. I'm based at a non-towered airport. Pat's based at a non-towered airport. I find fuel prices are usually better there, and I meet really interesting people there. They're a little more casual, maybe, just a laid back atmosphere. I meet fascinating people at these places, where at towered airports, for all their benefits, that tends to be a little bit more of a transactional experience rather than an interactional experience. But that's me. I will often look and see, oh, there's a really interesting runway there, or there is a place in Mississippi I've been trying to get to for a couple of years. They have a grass strip right outside the restaurant, and I've heard rave reviews about this place. It's almost worth flying to Mississippi just to check it out. But that's me, Ingram. I mean, I'll go to towered airports. I'll go to a Class Charlie airport if it's appropriate. But I like the small town stuff, and I'm kind of a small town guy. I grew up on a farm. I just like that. Kay, how do you pick the route you're going to fly and what destinations you're going to go to along the way?
Well, for me, it's more, what am I planning to do at that destination or along the way? Is it sightseeing, or am I going airplane camping? Am I visiting family or friends? Is it business? So depending on that, I'll pick an airport that best suits those needs. But Jamie, I'm on the opposite end of you as far as the towered versus non-towered. I prefer Delta, Charlie airspace airports. Bravo sometimes, but I find it just more, it meets more of my needs. And so I will go into non-towered fields absolutely all the time. But my preference is to go into airports that have bigger FBOs and have amenities, and there's hotels or car rental or a car there at the airport for you to use. I like to look at all those services, and I do contact them before getting there. So I'll call the FBO, or it might be a flying club or flight school, and I will ask, are these services available, and when are they open, and if any events are going on. And so I do prefer the bigger airports. But I think it's also because I started off as a student pilot it was in New York TCA. That's what we called it then, Class Bravo, but it was New York TCA back in the 80s and 90s, and I got used to that. And so my first time going out to some rural area, that kind of freaked me out, because I was used to flying in those busy airspace right from the beginning of my training. So I think a lot of it has to do with your comfort level. Um, so that's, yeah, that's my preference. Bigger
I
airports.
like that. I also used to fly up around New York when it was a TCA. And I got most of my ratings at a Delta airport that underlied a Bravo airport. So I was also used to it. I like the non-tower, but I love that we have a different perspective because there's no reason we should all have the same preference. Now let's get Pat to be the tiebreaker. Pat, what do you like to do? And I don't want you to get stressed about casting your vote one way or the other. Neither one
Oh,
of us is close enough to punch you. Just tell us what you think.
well, first of all, I'm stifling my tendency to want to make a really cheap joke about potluck, but that would be low hanging fruit and not fair. At any rate, actually, believe it or not, I actually I'm a centrist, and I kind of fall in between the two of you. It depends a little bit on where I'm going. My primary concern isn't whether it's towered or non-towered, but what kind of services do they have on the field. I want to know if I've got a flat tire, there's somebody there that's going to be able to fix it. I want to know if an alternator goes bad. Is there a mechanic that's on the field? A shop that's on the field? There are a whole bunch of airports that are on the way to Sun and Fun and to Denver and to Oshkosh and all the places that I fly on a regular basis, that might have a local mechanic who will come from somewhere to fix your airplane. But first of all, we got to find him or her and get them there, as opposed to a place that, at least on regular business hours, Monday through Friday, where there's somebody on the field that can address the issue. So I am ambivalent about class Delta or class Charlie, or non-towered. I'm much more concerned about maintenance on the field. Not as concerned about gas prices. That's not my primary concern when I'm flying cross country. Although I just soon save 15 cents is the next person, but that's not my primary concern when I'm flying cross country.
I like this. We've covered a lot of topics here. We've talked about the challenges with weather issues, decision making, gathering information, not scud running ever under any circumstance. We've talked about the possibility of flat tires or getting the right kind of fuel and all that. And we've even talked about the human factor, because let's face it, all of us are going to need to go to the bathroom at some point, and not everybody likes to carry an empty bottle in the airplane, although Dave Hirschman taught me that, and it's a valuable lesson. Having said all that, is general aviation, in your opinion, Kay, a viable way to travel about the country? Whether you're going 100 miles or 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles, would you opt for that just because you could?
Yes. I think it's a convenient way to travel from point A to B, provided that you are not just meeting regulatory requirements as far as the currency, but that you're really safe. If that's the case, then utilize the airports and your pilot certificate to get from point A to B and enjoy the journey. Take advantage and stop along different airports. I'll give an example where Donnie, can you put that picture up from San Diego to San Jose? This is a route that I take quite often. And you can see a whole lot of places. So there's a zoomed out view from Southern California to Central, and here's a zoomed in view. And just look at all the different airports along the way. And there's many more, because as you zoom in, you'll see more. There's so many options, and I like to take advantage of that. So when I make this very frequent trip from San Diego to San Diego, I don't follow just that pink line. I am stopping along the way, and it is a lot faster for me to do this flight, whether it's in a Cirrus or even a 172. I can get there faster than Southwest. And I'm talking about door to door, particularly if I have to go to some other airports along the way. It's a lot more practical.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I have owned a 182, a 172, almost bought an RV last year. I'm hoping Ingram Leedy likes me enough that he'll let me fly in his Diamond with him, because that would be cool. But I generally fly a 152 or a Piper Cub I love them very much, and the Cub is slow, but you know what? I have no hesitation taking a long trip in the 152. I'm down low. I get a beautiful view of America, and I will challenge people in most places. I'm not sure about California, but I suspect it's the same. Even flying from Florida up to New England along the very densely populated East Coast of the United States, it's mostly forests and farms. And it can be shocking to people to realize how much green there is, how much water there is, with little pockets of civilization. But the reality is, even today, with 300 and some odd million people in the United States, there's an enormous amount of greenery, and it is just beautiful. And it's a view you don't get any other way. Pat, you have taken a number of long flights. I think sometimes in a Comanche. Was that a red Comanche that you were flying that time?
Red, white, and blue.
Well, I'm going to guess I know your answer, that you are just as happy to be in a GA aircraft, maybe happier than you would be with the airlines. What's your thought on traveling?
Well, right alongside with Kay, what I have found is that generally speaking, and again, I'll talk in terms of generalities. Generally speaking, if up to about 1,000 miles, I can usually beat the airlines door to door. Now, of course, let's not kid ourselves that's an expensive way to travel. But if you have two people in the airplane that are sharing the cost, especially if you have three people in the airplane, especially with gas prices now and airline tickets, the price of airline tickets, we can come pretty close on a Sun and Fun or Osh trip with three of us in the airplane splitting the costs equally. We can come pretty darn close to an airline ticket. And the rental car is waiting there for us on the ramp when we land, and we don't have to go through security, and we don't have to, just submit ourselves or subject ourselves to that kind of treatment. I'm a big fan of general aviation. We had a trip to Denver last month for a family wedding, and I told my wife, I said, if we can't fly ourselves, we're going to drive. To me, airline travel has just gotten to be, it hasn't been fun for a long time, but it's even worse now. And I would rather drive. Obviously, that doesn't work to Hawaii, but some place within the continent of the United States, if it's a reasonable, within 1,000 miles, I'm going to fly myself. It's just not. We made it to Denver and back in 11 hours of total flying time, 1,800 nautical, almost 1,900 nautical miles. But there's a picture that's just kind of coming into the greater Denver area. No, I'm sorry, that's departing Denver and flying south, leaving Denver. And you got the Rockies off the right wingtip. Gosh, how much more beautiful can that be? And you can see the day was beautiful, and it happened to be good weather the entire trip. We actually had a tailwind in both directions, not a big one. That's the plains of northern Texas and southern Colorado as we're flying north into Colorado. And I think there's one more picture you might have up there, Donnie. That's just kind of a picture of ForeFlight, of our route on ForeFlight. If you don't have it, it's not a big deal. But I'm a big fan. That's it. That's it right there. But there's some examples of Class Bravo airspace and some notations that I made on the ForeFlight screen of altitudes and things like that I needed to be concerned about, and notice the terrain. And the fact that we're making a little bit of a jog there as we fly south. So, but anyway, that's a very long and convoluted answer to the question that I'm a huge GA fan, and just be prepared to stop somewhere if you need to. We had to do that coming back from Sun and Fun a couple of years ago in Mobile, but we ended up having a great time the next day until the weather cleared, and it was all good. So, big GA fan.
I like it. And, I was just going to address Ingram Leedy's question because he referenced Kay's mention of security, and do pilots carry firearms? And thank goodness Mike Schwab came up with a great link, and I appreciate it. I was instructing years ago, and I had a student who was a deputy sheriff, and we're flying. And he's like really fidgety. You just couldn't settle down. And, I'm like, what's wrong with you, man? And he's like, oh, my gun's digging into my side. And I'm, hey, if you got a gun in the plane, you got to tell me. He said, well, I'm a sheriff's deputy. We have to carry a gun all the time. It depends where you are, Ingram. and you might want to consider, in Florida, you're good. In Texas, Arizona, you're good carrying a firearm in an airplane. If you're in Massachusetts, very possibly a different story. So go ahead and follow that link. And you can, if any of you are curious, you can always write to us, ambassadors@aopa.org, with any question, including this one, and we'll get you a reference, because that's what we do. We care. Deep in our hearts, we care. But
In
yeah,
Alaska,
if you're going, I'm sorry?
actually, in Alaska, it's actually you have to carry a firearm.
Yeah, the rules really do change depending on where you are, what kind of climate it is there. And you're right. In Alaska, you're going to have to, because you may be needing it. But, this is one of those things. If you're flying to the Bahamas or Mexico, you might want to check with international rules. If you're flying to a state you're not familiar with and making a fuel stop in between, you might want to check on those rules. And by the way, Danny Carson says he flies a Cessna 150. Usually it's about 2.5 hours of flying time, and he tries to keep it safe. But, even in that 150, to our question about traveling, you're talking about 200 and 250 miles a leg, generally, depending on winds. In just a couple fuel stops, you're hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and in a distance that you couldn't have possibly covered in that time in a car. And to Kay and Pat's point, you may even beat the airlines on, even in a 150, a 500-mile trip door to door. You're probably doing it faster than the airlines can. So, Air J, very insightful. Air J, you three give awesome information. I think that's true, especially you two, because I have to follow the script. You guys have a little more flexibility. Kay did an excellent job moderating last week. And yeah, I do have to thank Kay and Pat. I unfortunately had a death in the family last time on the day of the episode. They had no warning and pulled together and did it. I really appreciate it, guys. You did a great job. This may be the case later this week as I'm getting blown away by another hurricane. It's one of those years. Mike Jesh, who we greatly respect. And by the way, Kay, I met Mike in California, St. Louis Obispo, at the Jet Center.
It's a small world.
Mike said, I'm telling you, everywhere you go, you meet somebody either you don't know or you wish you did, and it's great. Mike says, earlier talk about how far you can fly in your airplane. The answer is anywhere. I might just have to stop for fuel on the way. That's that great expression that I truly love. Pave a mile of road, you can go a mile. Pave a mile of runway, you can go anywhere in the world. You really can. That's not an expression. You can literally fly around the world in a small airplane. So thanks for being with us. I appreciate this. And Danny says he enjoys our conversations and tips. Such a wealth of knowledge. That's the thing. Because Pat, you have a book right there, don't you? Pat's got the cheat sheet. And just as we wrap up here, Pat will be using the dulcet tones of his velvety voice to read the entirety of the hours throughout the rest of the evening. So please, when we sign off, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. I really appreciate y'all being here. I do. The three of us really love what we do. This is our thing. Thank you so much for being part of Ask an Ambassador. Keep coming back. We've got over 100,000 total views. It's because of you that we get to do this, and we do it for you. If you've got any questions, write to us, ambassadors@aopa.org. We will come back because you've been such nice people on Tuesday, November 22nd, 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific. We will be right back here, or essentially back here, talking to you about whatever you want. So RJ wants to know if Pat sleeps through the book. Yes, he does. I can't tell you how I know, but yes, he does.
Well, we do have an intimate relationship.
Hey, thanks a lot, Donnie McKay, crack producer, made all this happen. Donnie, thank you very much. Can you play us on out of here for one more time?